China's new crown epidemic continues to break out. Their economy has gotten worse. China is still aiming for zero crown pneumonia. The epidemic has turned tourist cities and shops into ghost towns. And what will happen next? Now let's see. China, the real situation of tourism and shops. With a population of 1.4 billion, China is the world's largest consumer group. Before the outbreak of the new crown epidemic, the number of domestic tourists exceeded 6 billion, of which more than 16 million were foreign tourists. However, due to strict epidemic control in the past 2 years, the number of domestic tourists has dropped sharply to 2 billion. It is very difficult for foreign tourists to enter. The revenue from the tourism industry alone has been severely hit, as we can see from the previous epidemic situation in Sonia. During the summer vacation in August, Sonia, the most popular tourist city in China, welcomed 100,000 tourists in one day. But unfortunately, because of the sudden epidemic, 80,000 tourists were stranded there and they could not go home. According to China's regulations, in order to prevent the spread of the epidemic, the roads are blocked, no vehicles except military vehicles are allowed to pass through, and no one is allowed to leave here. It will take at least a month to lift the blockade here, and the expensive hotel fees cannot be paid. These tourists went to the airport before the blockade. At least there is no money to eat, drink and sleep at the airport, and the airport has no reason to drive them away. It is not until September that Hainan has officially lifted the citywide lockdown, but people still need to hold nucleic acid within 48 hours to enter Hainan. Why is China still aiming for zero COVID-19? During a summer vacation, the epidemic in China began to spread. China's characteristic response to the epidemic was to blockade in place, until there were no new additions in the area, and people were not allowed to go out after 7 days. Foreigners living in China are not used to it. Now foreign countries are basically open. People move around at will, and they don't need any nucleic acid certificates. Is it because foreigners don't pay attention to the epidemic, or China's control is too strict? Xinjiang in autumn, when there was no outbreak of the epidemic, was the most desirable tourist attraction for Chinese people. But this year, no one appreciates the beautiful scenery, because there is still an epidemic in Xinjiang, and more than 200 scenic spots are open to receive tourists, but almost no one shows up. Here, the loss of scenic spots is serious. Almost all shops are closed, and the lively scenic spots have become ghost towns. In addition, according to the requirements of the epidemic prevention policy, masks are required in scenic spots, and nucleic acid certificates are required to enter. There are fewer and fewer people traveling. Some shops are not open, and some people may be closed because they cannot survive. Even if it is allowed to open, it will not cause a lot of people because of the epidemic, and the store may not be able to maintain due to insufficient turnover. So what about their high street? The clothing city of Guangzhou railway station was crowded with people when there was no outbreak. As a wholesale city, the clerks hardly paid attention to the retail customers. But now, you see, yes, this is the current situation in the clothing city. Apart from the staff, there are only clothes left, and there are no guests at all. How to pay the expensive rent here? Fortunately, the live broadcast industry in China had already developed before the epidemic. When no customers came to the door, the people of Clothing City saved part of the performance through live broadcast. This is Shangshajiu in Liwan district. Like many commercial streets, it is an old street in Guangzhou. Before the epidemic, it was almost like a train station, with more people than you can imagine. But now, where have people gone? Shops are almost closed. The same is true in the current foreign trade industry. Foreigners cannot enter China, and Chinese people cannot leave. The freight transportation of trade exchanges is strictly scrutinized, which has made the development of foreign trade regress a lot in recent years. September 1st is the day when the children go to school. Parents can't wait to send the beast to school and want to live a quiet life for a few days. However, local officials in various provinces and cities are worried that tourists will bring the virus back to the local area, causing or exacerbating the local epidemic. Now that half a month has passed, there are still schools that have not notified the time to return to school. The economic downturn brought about by the epidemic has made the lives of local people even more difficult. Many people have lost their jobs and failed to start businesses. People are afraid to spend all their savings and will not buy a house or a car. At present, there are still 50 million real estate in China not sold. Why does China still insist on strict epidemic prevention despite knowing that such strict control will have an impact on the economy? In fact, every time there is a new case of the epidemic, China will require the entire region to do nucleic acid testing, and it is free. But the nucleic acid inspection, the cost is not cheap. It costs at least 15 yuan at a time. The government bears the cost. This is a huge expenditure for the government, and the government's treasury will also usher in a crisis. To solve the economic problem, the only way is to let people flow, but the flow of people will inevitably lead to the infection of the new crown virus. No one knows where the source comes from, but there will always be sudden cases. But now, China does not want to imagine like foreign countries, treat the new crown as a common cold, and fully open up. China's economy has become worse. After the epidemic, tourist cities and shops have become ghost towns. What will happen next? Such policies will only hinder their economic development. What do you think about this?